Well, hello, friends out there in YouTube land. This is Robert Hamm with RobertHammPhotography.com. Catch me over on Twitter at RobHammPhoto. You can find me on Facebook and YouTube at /RobertHammPhotography. Today, we're going to edit a photo on the Surface Pro 4. Now, I've been using the Surface Pro 4 for a couple of months now. I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding of its capabilities and how it works, and I'm very pleased. I had been using the Surface Pro 3 for the past year, maybe a little over a year. And I just posted a video on the Surface Pro 3 after 1 year, so check the link for that video itself. It was a great device. The Surface Pro 4 brings at it some additional capabilities, and I thought it'd be nice to edit another photo on the Surface Pro 4 and just kind of show you how I work with it. Currently, everything is being done with the keyboard cover attached. This is not usually how I work. I normally sit at a coffee shop or something and hold the Surface Pro 4 like a clipboard and then use it. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is a finished result. Let's go back to the before. Now, this is a JPEG file. I shot this wedding in JPEG and RAW, and as usual, all of my RAW files are on an external disk in case I need them for whatever reason, and I usually would just work with the JPEGs. RAW files work very well here on the Surface Pro 4, but most of the time, I don't really have to do too much with my JPEGs. This just happens to be a situation where I was shooting very flat outdoors, and I wanted a very flat profile, kind of bring in some nice pieces of detail later on. And if you shoot outdoors, especially a wedding, then you'll understand that, you know, shooting against a bright sky with a reflective water and everything, it's going to create a more flat image in the first place. It's a more technically difficult image to shoot, and especially properly exposed. So my strategies here are usually just to I usually try to expose more towards the left, but we got a little bit of a right exposure here. However, the image is still a nice, good, clean image to work with. Once again, we're going to show you that final image right there, and you can see that we're going to toggle back and forth real quick. Look at her skin tone, specifically on her face, her neck, and her arms. Just look at all the skin and see the difference on how it changed. The biggest way to achieve that result is actually using the hue, saturation, and luminance tool in order to bring areas that may not be properly exposed, or to pump them up instead of using a brush or something. So let's just go straight back to the beginning. So here we go. We are back here at import. And the first couple of things I always like to do is I always like to see what the computer thinks. And that's what the computer thinks, Lightroom thinks as an auto exposure. I don't like that at all. For me, I prefer a little bit. I just definitely need some contrast. We're going to bring the contrast up. I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit to bring the sky back into play. And you can see we're recovering some nice detail up here. I'm going to bring my shadows up just a little bit, right about there. Bring the whites up some. Lots of times I'll use whites, your white clipping, and instead of using exposure, because the white clipping can very easily increase your image brightness to some extent, but also not give any kind of additional grain or noise that you would get from using the exposure, especially if you got to push it a lot. I think that's too much contrast for me, so we're going to bring it back down here just a little bit. I'm going to mess around with the clarity and see, I don't really want to adjust this image using clarity right now. So this is where we are after just a couple of steps, and we're going to continue down here and look a little bit closer using a hue, saturation, and luminance tool. In order to make this easier to see, I'm going to collapse my histogram so we can see the entire scope. When I look right here, I'm first looking at my saturation colors, and I say my reds and everything are saturated, but this is outdoors, and if I kind of bring the reds down, her whole face, there's a lot of pink in her skin. So where will we really start? Let's go ahead and actually bring the face and the skin up to the exposure that we want a little bit brighter without using any brush. There's no brush being used. Watch this. So when we start working on the luminance of the orange channel, I'm doing this back and forth so that you can see. Look at that right there. But when we get that, we see that her face is a little bit rosy. So we're going to achieve that now. Now we've got this nice color gradation on her skin, much more true to life. And there's a little bit more that we can do in order to bring back a little bit of her tan, just by coming over here and messing with the orange saturation and the red saturation. Now we're looking good. These adjustments to saturation generally should be very small, positive or minus. Adjustments to luminance can be much larger. But I want to show you something. When you start to adjust different parts of the luminance, like in this white right here, we're going to make it really bright white. Okay, and we're going to do so by bringing the blue slider up. Whites and shadows have lots of blues in them. But look what happens to the sky. It blows everything else. Okay, so we can't do that. So let's go over here and just adjust the saturation of the blues down in order to help bring the white back into play. Well, that doesn't work either because then we lose all the blue channel information. So really, where we need to be is a slight saturation of the blues and a little bit more of the luminance. Okay, so that's going to give us the ability. We're just going to play with these until we get them right where we want them. Now, when you start adjusting blues and anything on the saturation too much, I want you to look and see what happens to the eyes. Look how the whites of the eyes change color. See? The actual white part of the eye is changing, so you always have to be very careful when you're messing around with the saturation of the blue, specifically purple, blue, and magenta. Those two will really bring that right up and down. It'll mess it up real good for you. That's what I'm trying to say. So we're still over here with our saturation of her face. We're going to look at the yellows. And the yellows are okay. Specifically, look over here at her bouquet. This is now when I want to start adjusting my hues. I want to kind of change her skin tone a little bit. And I don't want it to be red. I want it to have slightly more orange feel to it. So now look. It's very subtle. But if you look at the V in her neck right here where her collarbone is, look what happens when we adjust that. We can get rid of a lot of that red shadowing that's not really there. We're going to come back here and bring the yellows out or the oranges out. I kind of like it a little bit with the more yellow. Bring my yellows back in line right about here. Greens. We're now messing with the greens. We're going to bring some of that saturation back into the greens, but not much. If you mess with the aquas, aqua's a tough color. The only place that you're really going to see the change is right here in the windows in the background building in the top right. So I don't really mess with that too much. And watch what happens when we mess with the blue. When you mess with the blue, you're changing the entire color temperature of the blue, so leave that alone. It's already correct. But you will see in here and right here in the flowers, as well as at her right shoulder, upper right, this area right here, you'll see that when we start moving the luminance here, those two change completely. So we can bring purples up into the more magenta hues. We can bring the magenta hues up into the more red hues. Okay, and now we're really starting to look quite nice. Okay, so we've used our hue saturation and luminance tool. Now it's time to add some characteristic to your photo. And so I always do that at about 20 motion, which is like particularly needed in this image. It's very clear, but I always add it. For here, I'm going to bring my sharpening up to about 9. I'm going to press the Alt key, and if I was using the computer without the keyboard, I would just come down here and press the soft touch keyboard to come up so that I could access a full keyboard. Most people don't use that for whatever reason. Now we're just going to see where we're going to mask here. I just want to mask everything out except for the most key details, which eye, hair, and some of that bouquet. Right about there. And now that masking is going to show me where my sharpening is being applied. And I usually go 10, 11, 1, and 33 or 34. I like to have that little negative slope right there. It looks nice. But we're still not completely done. Since we've now got a good color contrast that we like, we can safely adjust the vibrance of the image and not have any weird color casts come up. Most of the time people hit the vibrance first, and you get this little funky colors that don't look normal. It's not until you adjust your actual individual color channels through hue, saturation, and luminance that adjusting the vibrance won't make the picture go crazy. Okay? And then the last thing that we're going to do over here is just put a nice little vignette on the image. Okay? So let's bring that in. And let's look at it. I think that's nice. Now let's hit before, after, before, after, before, after. Now as we're looking at it here, if you wanted to make some final last moment fine-tune adjustments, it'd be an absolutely great time to do so. What you could adjust is definitely up to you, but most of the time I'll come back here and I'll look at my tone curve and I'll go to like something a little bit more contrasty. I'm looking and I'm noticing that don't particularly, let me rephrase. If I adjust the tone curve for more contrast down there in the tone curves, I usually take off a little bit of my contrast that I added for effect. What I'm seeing right now is I don't like the eyes. Right now, we've adjusted a little bit too much of the magenta, so I'm going to come up here, I'm going to grab a brush. I'm going to grab actually my teeth whitening brush. There's an iris enhanced brush that I have, but I like this one. I'm going to come in real close. This is 7:1, so it's closer than you actually would be. And the reason's because I want to use this brush. I'm just going to tap the center of the eye in order to move my little point around. I've got auto masking on. I've got my flow, density, and I'm just going to come over here and lightly paint. Very lightly. Now this will have to be adjusted one more time at full scale, because you can make somebody look very unnatural with too much of the that. We're going to close it real quick. Okay, and now we're going to go back to my contrast. Look at her eyes. Now look at her eyes. Much, much nicer. Okay, and we're going to come into her teeth, and we could also add just a little bit of teeth whitening here. Put that up there. I'm just going to mask this just right across. There we go. Now, you notice I got a little bit of the lip in there, so we're going to pull that back. And I kind of went too far, didn't I? So I'm just going to auto mask one more time right about there. Good. So we're going to turn both of those off once again. And we're going to come down here and go contrast. So original. Yeah, definitely a lot better right here. So there you go. There you got it. Nice image. Very quickly, 10 minutes on this image, but when you're editing these photos yourself, obviously, it doesn't take me 10 minutes to edit one photo generally. Actually, I don't know that it does ever, except when I'm trying to explain it. So I hope that you found this helpful. The purpose here was to use the hue, saturation, and luminance tool in order to help color correct an image. And I wanted to show you my entire process from start to finish. So once again, start, very flat image. Gives us a lot of latitude, especially even in our JPEG right here. We didn't even need to go into the raw. Details held up to our finished image right there. Skin's nicely color corrected. Teeth and eyes have been whitened a little bit. And just a really beautiful image. Guys, I'm Robert Hamm with RobertHammPhotography.com. Catch me on Facebook and Twitter, as well as YouTube at /RobertHammPhotography. And I had a great time. Please like and subscribe if this video was helpful for you. Cheers.